The early morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Ashford Grand, casting long shadows across the pristine marble floors of Chicago's most prestigious luxury hotel. Grace Williams moved through the hallways like a ghost, silent, efficient, invisible. Her dark uniform was pressed to perfection, her movements practiced after 12 years of service. She knew every corner of this building, every guest's preference, every unspoken rule that kept people like her employed and people like them comfortable. At 47, Grace had learned the art of disappearing in plain sight. She cleaned suites where a single night cost more than her monthly rent. She polished surfaces that reflected lives she would never live, and she did it all with a quiet dignity that her mother had taught her. Head down, work honest, pride intact. "Morning, Grace," whispered Maria, another housekeeper, as they crossed paths near the service elevator. The Puerto Rican woman had kind eyes that always seemed worried. "Bryce is here today, walking the floors with those investor people. Be careful." Grace nodded, her stomach tightening. Bryce Ashford, the founder's grandson, 28 years old and recently promoted to Director of Operations, a title everyone knew he'd inherited, not earned. Since taking the position 3 months ago, he'd made it his mission to modernize efficiency, which really meant finding reasons to criticize staff in front of guests, cutting corners on benefits, and reminding everyone who held the power. "I'll stay out of his way," Grace murmured, though they both knew that wouldn't matter. Bryce had a talent for finding targets. The morning passed in its usual rhythm. Grace worked her way through the 14th floor, changing linens with practiced precision, replacing towels in perfect thirds, ensuring every surface gleamed. She took pride in her work, even if no one noticed she noticed. That had to be enough. By noon, the hotel's grand lobby had transformed into a showcase. A group of international investors had arrived for a tour, and Bryce Ashford stood at the center of it all, immaculate in his tailored navy suit, his blonde hair styled with casual perfection that probably took 30 minutes. His smile was bright, confident, the smile of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. Grace descended the staff stairwell to deliver fresh towels to the front desk supply room, a task that should have taken 2 minutes. But as she stepped into the service corridor, she heard raised voices in the main lobby. Against her better judgment, she paused near the doorway. "The Ashford Grand represents 5 generations of excellence," Bryce was saying, his voice carrying across the marble expanse. "We maintain the highest standards in every department. Our staff understands that perfection isn't a goal, it's a requirement." Grace moved quickly, keeping her eyes down as she navigated the edge of the lobby. "Just get to the supply room, You there? Stop." The voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. Grace froze, her heart hammering. She turned slowly, finding Bryce Ashford staring directly at her, his expression cold. The investors, 6 men in expensive suits, had turned to look as well. So had several guests. And the front desk staff, and the concierge team. Everyone was watching. If you're enjoying this story and want to see what happens next, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring you more incredible true stories like Grace's. "Hit that button now. You won't regret it." "Come here," Bryce said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she walked toward him, clutching the towels against her chest like a shield. She could feel dozens of eyes on her. Guests in the seating area, staff members who'd stopped mid-task, the investors with their calculating stares. "What's your name?" Bryce asked, though she knew he already knew. She'd worked here since before he was old enough to drive. "Grace Williams, sir." "Grace." He said it slowly, like he was tasting something unpleasant. "Can you explain to me, and to our distinguished guests, why I found this in the supply closet on the 14th floor?" He held up a hand towel. For a moment, Grace couldn't see anything wrong with it. It was white, clean, folded according to hotel standards. Then she noticed a tiny yellow stain near one corner, barely visible, probably from a guest's makeup remover. Her mouth went dry. "Sir, that must have been missed during quality check. I'll replace it immediately." "You'll replace it?" Bryce's laugh was sharp, performative. He turned to address the investors, including them in his theater. "This is exactly the kind of complacency I've been talking about. 12 years of employment and still making careless mistakes. Still thinking good enough is acceptable when we promise perfection. Mr. Ashford, please, I can..." Grace's voice cracked. She hated the sound of it, hated the pleading tone, but she needed this job. Her daughter's college tuition, her mother's medication, the rent on their small apartment in Bronzeville. "No," Bryce cut her off. his voice rising. "You can't. That's the problem. You and staff like you. You've gotten comfortable, complacent. You think this hotel runs on charity?" He turned to his assistant, a young man who looked deeply uncomfortable. "Get HR. I want this handled properly." The lobby had gone completely silent. Even the usual ambient noise, the clink of coffee cups, the murmur of conversations, the soft classical music, seemed to have faded away. Grace felt the weight of that silence crushing down on her, felt the stares burning into her skin. "Sir, I've always..." She couldn't form a complete sentence. The words tangled in her throat, mixing with tears she refused to let fall. "Not here. Not in front of everyone." "Your employment is terminated effective immediately," Bryce announced, loud enough for everyone to hear clearly. "Security will escort you to collect your belongings. The Ashford Grand cannot afford to maintain staff who don't share our commitment to excellence." Grace stood frozen, the towel still clutched in her hands. 12 years. 12 years of arriving early, staying late, covering shifts, never calling in sick even when she should have. 12 years of Christmas bonuses she'd saved for her daughter's future. 12 years of pride in doing her job well, even when no one noticed. Gone, in 30 seconds, over a stain the size of a dime. Around her she could see the reactions. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others indifferent. The staff members kept their heads down, knowing they could be next. The investors seemed impressed by Bryce's decisive leadership, and Bryce himself looked satisfied, like he'd just won something important. Grace's hands shook as she set the towels on a nearby console table. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't give him that. But as she turned toward the service corridor, her vision blurred with tears she could no longer control. That's when she heard it. The slow, rhythmic tap of a cane against marble. Everyone turned toward the hotel's main entrance, where a woman had appeared in the doorway. She was elderly, perhaps in her mid-70s, but she carried herself with an unmistakable authority. Her silver hair was swept back in an elegant twist. Her cream-colored suit was impeccably tailored, and her blue eyes, sharp despite her age, swept across the lobby with the precision of someone who missed nothing. Eleanor Ashford, the founder's widow, the matriarch of the Ashford family. Bryce's face went pale. "Mother? I didn't know you were..." But Eleanor wasn't looking at her grandson. Her gaze had locked onto Grace, who stood frozen in the center of the lobby, tears streaming down her face, her whole body trembling with humiliation. The elderly woman moved forward with surprising speed, her cane clicking against the marble with each step. She walked past the investors without acknowledging them, past her grandson without a glance, past everyone else in that crowded lobby. She walked straight to Grace, and in front of everyone, the investors, the guests, the staff, the security cameras recording everything, Eleanor Ashford reached out and took Grace Williams' hand in both of her own. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I've been looking for you." The lobby erupted into confused murmurs. Bryce took a step forward, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion to something that looked almost like fear. "Mother, what are you..." "Be quiet, Bryce." Eleanor's voice cut through the noise like steel. She didn't take her eyes off Grace, whose tears had stopped from sheer shock. "Tell me your name, dear." Grace. Grace Williams." Eleanor's grip tightened. "Williams. Your mother? Was her name Sarah Williams?" Grace's breath caught. "Yes. How did you..." "And you have a birthmark. Here." Eleanor touched her own collarbone just above her heart. Grace's hand flew to the same spot on her chest where, beneath her uniform, a small star-shaped birthmark had always resided, something her mother had called her lucky star. "How do you know that?" Grace whispered. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Because, my dear girl, I was there the day you were born." The silence that followed was absolute. Bryce stood frozen, his face draining of all color as he watched his mother clutch the hand of the woman he'd just publicly humiliated and fired. And Grace Williams, the invisible maid who'd spent 12 years disappearing into the background, suddenly realized that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. But the question everyone in that lobby wanted answered was the same one screaming through her mind. How did Eleanor Ashford know her mother? And what did that have to do with a birthmark no one should know about? The lobby of the Ashford Grand had witnessed countless moments over its 90-year history. Proposals, celebrity arrivals, business deals worth millions. But nothing compared to the electric silence that gripped the space now. Hundreds of eyes watched as Eleanor Ashford, the woman who'd helped build this empire from nothing, stood holding the hand of a fired housekeeper, tears streaming down both their faces. Bryce Ashford felt his world tilting, Mother, I don't understand what's happening here, but this woman was terminated for... I said be quiet. Eleanor's voice was low, dangerous. She hadn't released Grace's hand. Tell me about your mother, Grace. Is Sarah still... She passed away 6 years ago. Grace's voice was barely a whisper. The shock of the moment had momentarily pushed aside the humiliation of her firing, replaced by a desperate confusion. Pancreatic cancer. She never mentioned anyone named Eleanor Ashford. Eleanor's face crumbled. She steadied herself with her cane, and for a moment, she looked every one of her 76 years. Sarah's gone? Oh God. I tried to find her. For years I tried, but she disappeared completely. Changed her name, I assume. I should have tried harder. I should have... Her voice broke. Mother, please. Bryce's tone had shifted from authoritative to pleading. He could feel the investors watching, could see his assistant recording this on his phone, probably already texting the executive team. Whatever this is about, perhaps we should discuss it privately. No. Eleanor turned to face her grandson, and the fury in her eyes made him take a step back. You just fired this woman in front of everyone. You humiliated her publicly for your own ego. So publicly is exactly how this will be resolved. She turned to address the crowd that had gathered. Investors, guests, staff members who'd emerged from back hallways, even people from the street who'd wandered in to see what the commotion was about. My name is Eleanor Ashford, she began, her voice clear and strong despite her tears. 48 years ago, I was a different person, younger, scared, and pregnant with a baby who wasn't my husband's child. The collective gasp that went through the lobby was audible. Bryce's face went from pale to ashen. Several of the investors exchanged shocked glances. Even Grace looked stunned, though she didn't understand yet what this had to do with her. My husband, James Ashford, God rest his soul, we'd been married 3 years and we couldn't conceive. The doctors said it was unlikely we ever would. James was devastated. His father, Bryce's great-grandfather, was putting enormous pressure on him to produce an heir. The family business, the legacy, everything depended on it. Eleanor's grip on Grace's hand tightened as if she needed the contact to continue. I made a terrible mistake. I had an affair with someone I shouldn't have, someone James worked with, and I got pregnant. When I realized it, I was terrified. If James found out, it would destroy him. If his father found out, I'd be divorced, penniless, and the scandal would ruin the Ashford name. Around the lobby, phones were appearing. People were recording this. Tomorrow, this would be everywhere. But Eleanor didn't seem to care. I needed help. Medical help, advice, somewhere safe to figure out what to do. Back then, in 1977, a woman in my position couldn't just walk into any doctor's office. Not with something like this. I needed discretion, and I needed someone I could trust. She turned back to Grace, her eyes searching the younger woman's face as if looking for traces of someone else. Your mother, Sarah, was working as a nurse at a private clinic on the South Side. She was 23 years old, brilliant, compassionate, and the first person who treated me like a human being instead of a scandal waiting to happen. When I showed up at that clinic, terrified and desperate, she was the one who stayed with me through the night, helping me understand my options. Grace's mind was reeling. Her mother had been a nurse. That was true. She'd worked at several clinics throughout her life before eventually becoming a home health aide when the nursing jobs became too scarce. But she'd never mentioned Eleanor Ashford, never mentioned anything like this. Sarah didn't judge me, Eleanor continued. She just listened, and when I told her I couldn't keep the baby, that it would destroy my marriage and my family, she helped me find the resources I needed. But more than that, she became my friend. For 3 months, while I figured everything out, she was the only person who knew my secret. Bryce had sunk into one of the lobby's leather armchairs, his face buried in his hands. His perfectly constructed day had collapsed into chaos, and he still didn't understand where this was going. What happened to the baby? Grace asked quietly, the question everyone wanted answered. Eleanor's expression softened, became distant as if she was seeing something from long ago. I miscarried. 12 weeks in. It was devastating and relieving in equal measure. Devastating because, despite everything, I'd started to feel connected to that life growing inside me. Relieving because it solved the impossible problem I'd been facing. She paused, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief she pulled from her purse. James never knew. No one knew except Sarah. She took care of me through the miscarriage, made sure I was safe, and never once asked for anything in return. But she did give me something. She gave me hope. She told me that sometimes our bodies know things we don't, that maybe this was a sign I needed to trust a different path. 6 months later, Eleanor's voice grew stronger. I conceived naturally. Against all odds. Everything the doctors had said was impossible. It happened. I had a son, James's biological son, and 4 years after that, a daughter. My family was complete, and James never knew about those dark 3 months when everything almost fell apart. Grace was beginning to understand, but the pieces still didn't quite fit. But how do you know me? How do you know about my birthmark? Eleanor smiled through her tears. Because Sarah and I stayed in touch. Secret touch, of course. I couldn't risk anyone finding out about our connection, but we wrote letters. She told me when she got married, when she got pregnant, when you were born. She sent me a photo of you when you were 2 days old lying in the hospital, and in that photo I could see the birthmark on your chest. A little star, she wrote. That meant you were destined for something special. The lobby was utterly silent. Even the street noise seemed to have faded away. We wrote for years, Eleanor continued. Sarah told me about your life, how smart you were, how kind, how you wanted to be a teacher. I sent money when I could, anonymously through a third party. I knew Sarah was struggling financially, especially after her husband left. I wanted to help, to repay the kindness she'd shown me. But then about 20 years ago, the letters stopped coming. I tried to find her, hired investigators, searched records, but Sarah Williams had vanished. I assumed she'd changed her name, maybe moved away. I never stopped looking. Grace felt her knees weaken. Her mother had known Eleanor Ashford, had helped her through an impossible situation, had been receiving anonymous help for years, and Grace had never known any of it. Why didn't she tell me? Grace whispered. Because that's who Sarah was, Eleanor said gently. She protected people's secrets. She understood that some stories aren't ours to tell, and she probably wanted to protect you from the weight of knowing something that could never be shared. Bryce finally raised his head. His expression was stricken. Mother, I didn't know. I had no idea. That's exactly the problem, Bryce. Eleanor's voice turned cold as she looked at her grandson. You didn't know. You didn't ask. You saw a woman in a housekeeping uniform and assumed she was disposable. You humiliated her in public over a microscopic stain on a towel to impress some investors. You never once considered that every person in this building has a story, a life, a value that goes far beyond their job title. She turned to address the investors directly. Gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your tour, but I think you've just witnessed something more valuable than any presentation about operational efficiency. You've seen exactly what kind of man my grandson is, and what kind of leader he isn't. One of the investors, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair, stepped forward. Mrs. Ashford, with all due respect, we're here to evaluate a significant investment in the Ashford Hotel Group. This personal matter, while certainly dramatic, doesn't change our assessment of the company's financial position. Doesn't it? Eleanor's smile was sharp. You're about to invest $50 million in a company run by a man who just fired a 12-year employee over a stain. A man who values appearances over people. A man who inherited his position and uses his power to punish those who can't fight back. Still sound like a solid investment to you? The investor hesitated, glancing at his colleagues. Grace could see the calculation happening behind their eyes. The viral video potential, the PR nightmare, the questions about company culture and leadership. Furthermore, Eleanor continued, I still maintain 40% ownership of the Ashford Hotel Group. James left it to me in his will, with the understanding that I would transfer it to our children when I deemed them ready. Bryce here was supposed to prove himself worthy of inheriting my shares on top of his father's portion. He was supposed to demonstrate leadership, compassion, and integrity. Bryce stood slowly, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. Mother, please, not here. Instead, Eleanor spoke over him. He's demonstrated cruelty, arrogance, and a complete lack of judgment. So here's what's going to happen. Grace Williams will be reinstated immediately, not as a housekeeper, but in a position commensurate with her years of loyal service. I'm thinking Director of Staff Relations and Development. Salary of $85,000 a year to start, full benefits, and a formal apology from my grandson. The lobby erupted into murmurs. Grace's head was spinning. $85,000, director position? This couldn't be real. 20 minutes ago she was fired and humiliated. Now, and Bryce, Eleanor's voice cut through the noise, will be stepping down from his position as Director of Operations, effective immediately. He'll return to an entry-level management position where he can learn what it actually means to work for a living. If, after 2 years, he's demonstrated genuine growth and understanding, we can discuss promotion. but his free ride ends today. You can't do this. Bryce's composure finally cracked. Dad left me those shares. This hotel is my inheritance. Your father left you 20%, which you still have. But my 40% comes with conditions. Conditions your father and I agreed upon. And one of those conditions is that I determine when, if ever, you're ready to lead this company. Today you proved you're not. You proved. Eleanor turned back to Grace, who stood frozen in shock, tears streaming down her face once again. But these were different tears. Confused tears. Overwhelming tears. I know this is a lot to process, Eleanor said gently, and I understand if you need time to think about the job offer. But please, Grace, let me make up for the years I couldn't help your mother. Let me honor her memory by helping you. Grace opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Grief for her mother, shock at the revelation, disbelief at the sudden reversal of fortune, and underneath it all, a dawning realization that her entire understanding of her mother's life had been incomplete. I need to sit down, she finally managed. Eleanor immediately guided her to one of the leather sofas, settling beside her while keeping hold of her hand. Around them, the lobby slowly began to resume its normal activity, though everyone was still watching, still recording, still trying to process what they just witnessed. Bryce stood alone in the center of the marble floor, his face a portrait of devastation. His assistant had disappeared. The investors were huddled together, speaking in low tones that didn't sound promising. And the staff members who'd witnessed his cruelty were no longer looking away. They were looking directly at him, and in their eyes, he could see a mixture of satisfaction and pity. As Eleanor comforted Grace, explaining the job offer in more detail and sharing memories of Sarah that made Grace laugh through her tears, a new figure emerged from the executive elevator. Robert Ashford, Eleanor's son and Bryce's father, strode into the lobby with the confident gait of a man accustomed to being in charge. At 58, he was still handsome, his dark hair graying at the temples, his suit impeccable. He took one look at the scene, his mother holding the hand of a weeping housekeeper, his son standing isolated and humiliated, investors looking uncomfortable and phones recording everything, and his expression hardened. What in God's name is going on here? Eleanor looked up at her son, and Grace saw something pass between them. A lifetime of unspoken understanding, of battles fought and won, of love and disappointment intertwined. Justice, Robert, Eleanor said simply. Finally, after all these years, justice. And as Robert Ashford began to grasp what had happened, as Bryce sank back into his chair with his head in his hands, as Grace Williams tried to comprehend that her entire life had just changed, the question that hung in the air was perhaps the most important one. What else had Sarah Williams kept secret? And what other truths were about to come to light? Robert Ashford's office on the 23rd floor overlooked Lake Michigan, offering a view that had been photographed for countless magazine spreads about Chicago's business elite. But today, the three people gathered in that office weren't looking at the view. They were locked in a conversation that felt more like a reckoning. You should have told me. Robert's voice was controlled, but Grace could hear the undercurrent of emotion. He stood by the window, his back to both his mother and Grace, who sat on opposite ends of a leather sofa. All these years, Mother, you should have told me about Sarah Williams. Why? Eleanor's response was sharp. So you could what, exactly? Track her down? Expose a secret that was never yours to know? Sarah helped me when I was desperate, and I owed her privacy above everything else. Robert turned, his expression pained. I'm not talking about the affair, Mom. I'm talking about the fact that a woman who meant that much to you, who helped you through something that traumatic, was working in our hotel for 12 years, and you didn't know. That's a failure of leadership. Mine, Dad's, all of us. Grace sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She changed out of her housekeeping uniform into clothes from her locker, jeans and a simple blue sweater that suddenly felt inadequate for a meeting in the executive suite. Everything still felt surreal. 2 hours ago, she was unemployed and humiliated. Now she was sitting in a room that cost more to furnish than she'd earned in 5 years, listening to the Ashford family argue about her mother. Grace, Robert said, pulling up a chair to sit across from her, I want to apologize. Not just for Bryce, though God knows he owes you more than words can express, but for the fact that you've been invisible to us. That's unacceptable. Grace met his eyes. She saw genuine regret there, but also something else. Calculation. Robert Ashford hadn't built on his father's empire by being purely sentimental. He was wondering, she realized, how this played out for the company. how it affected the investment deal, how the story would spread. "Mr. Ashford," she said carefully, "I appreciate the apology, but I need to understand something. Your mother offered me a position, Director of Staff Relations. That's not a real offer, is it? That's damage control." The room went silent. Eleanor looked impressed. Robert's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Respect, maybe." "It's both," he said finally. "I won't lie to you, Grace. Yes, part of this is about managing a situation that could become a PR disaster. My son's behavior was captured on multiple phones, and by now it's probably trending on social media. Millionaire fires Maid over stain. That's not a headline that helps us. So yes, offering you a position, reinstating you with dignity, that helps contain the damage." He leaned forward. "But it's also genuine. My mother doesn't make empty gestures. If she offered you that position, she believes you're capable of it. And frankly, after watching you maintain your composure through what Bryce put you through, I'm inclined to agree. Someone who can handle that kind of public humiliation with grace, no pun intended, is someone who understands people. That's valuable." Grace studied his face. "And if I say no?" "Then you say no." Eleanor spoke up. "Grace, I won't manipulate you the way I'm sure you think I am. If you want to walk away from the Ashford Grand, take a severance package and never look back, I'll understand. God knows we haven't earned your loyalty." "But?" Grace prompted. "Because there was always a but." Eleanor smiled sadly. "But I hope you won't. Not because of the job, not because of the money, though both are real and substantial. I hope you'll stay because your mother would want you to. Sarah believed in second chances. She gave me one when I didn't deserve it. Maybe this is my chance to give you something she couldn't." Grace felt tears threatening again. She was so tired of crying today. "What do you mean, something she couldn't give me?" Eleanor and Robert exchanged glances. Something passed between them. Some silent communication that made Grace's stomach tighten with anticipation. "Grace," Eleanor said slowly, "there are things about your mother's life that I think you should know. Things that might help you understand why she made certain choices. But I need to know. Do you want to know? Because once you hear this, you can't unhear it." Grace's mind raced. Her mother had been a private woman, especially about her past. Grace knew the basics. Sarah had grown up poor on the South Side, worked her way through nursing school, married Grace's father when she was 25, had Grace at 26, and divorced 2 years later when he abandoned them. After that, it was just the two of them against the world, working multiple jobs, making ends meet, surviving. But there had always been gaps. Questions her mother deflected, a sadness in her eyes when she thought Grace wasn't looking. And now, this revelation about Eleanor Ashford suggested those gaps were bigger than Grace had imagined. "Tell me," Grace said firmly. "Whatever it is, I want to know." Eleanor nodded, reaching into her purse to pull out an old envelope yellowed with age. "After Sarah's letters stopped, I kept looking for her. Like I said, I hired investigators, searched public records. Most trails went cold. But then, about 3 years ago, I found something. A safety deposit box registered under a name Sarah had used in one of her early letters, Sarah Patterson. It was at a small bank on the South Side that had been bought out by a larger chain. During the merger, unclaimed boxes were flagged, and that's how I found it." She handed the envelope to Grace. "The bank tried to contact the box holder, your mother, but the address was outdated. Eventually, they opened it. Inside was this letter, addressed to me. They tracked me down through the contents. I've kept it ever since, hoping someday I'd find you to give it to you." Grace's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting familiar, her mother's careful, precise script. "Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and someone finally connected the dots. I always knew you'd keep looking. That's who you are, persistent, loyal, even when it costs you. I need to tell you something I should have said years ago. The money you sent over the years, the anonymous donations, the scholarships that appeared at just the right moment, I knew it was you, and I was grateful beyond words. But I also felt guilty, because there was something I never told you, something I was ashamed of. When I helped you through your crisis, when I stayed with you through those dark months, I wasn't being purely altruistic. I was being paid, not by you. You never knew this. But someone did pay me. Someone who knew about your affair, who knew you were pregnant and who wanted to make sure you got the right guidance." Grace looked up sharply. "Someone paid her? Who?" Eleanor's expression was grim. "Keep reading." His name was Malcolm Winters. He worked with your husband James, a business associate, an advisor, someone James trusted completely. Malcolm came to me 6 weeks into your pregnancy and offered me $5,000 to help you make the right choice. $5,000, Eleanor. In 1977, that was more money than I'd seen in my entire life. He wanted me to encourage you to terminate the pregnancy, to make you believe it was the only option, to guide you toward a specific clinic where, he said, everything would be handled professionally and discreetly. I took the money. God forgive me, I took it. Because my rent was 3 months overdue. Because I was struggling to afford my own medications. Because I was drowning and he was offering me a lifeline. But I want you to know, I never manipulated you. Every conversation we had, every option I presented was genuine. I never pushed you toward the clinic, Malcolm suggested. When you miscarried naturally, Malcolm was furious. He demanded his money back. I refused. I told him that if he ever came near you again, I'd tell James everything. About the affair, about Malcolm's interference, about all of it. Malcolm disappeared after that. I never saw him again. But I've carried the guilt of taking that money for 40 years. I've carried the knowledge that my friendship with you started with a transaction, even if it became something real. The money you sent over the years, I used it for Grace's education, for her future. I used blood money to try to build something clean. I hope you can forgive me. I hope Grace can forgive me if she ever learns the truth. Your friend, despite everything. Sarah Grace read the letter twice, then a third time. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes, but she kept reading, trying to understand. Her mother had been paid to manipulate Eleanor Ashford, had taken money from someone trying to orchestrate a termination, had kept this secret for 4 decades. Malcolm Winters, Robert said quietly. I know that name. He was my father's business partner for years. Retired about 15 years ago, moved to Arizona. He died 5 years ago, heart attack. Eleanor was watching Grace carefully. I need you to understand something. When I read that letter 3 years ago, my first reaction was anger, betrayal. I'd thought Sarah's help was pure, and finding out there was money involved, it hurt. But then I realized something, Eleanor continued. Sarah took the money, but she didn't do what she was paid to do. She could have pushed me toward termination, collected her payment and walked away. Instead, she gave me genuine counsel. She let me make my own choice. And when Malcolm demanded his money back, she refused and threatened to expose him. That takes courage. Grace wiped her eyes. Why would Malcolm Winters want you to terminate the pregnancy? What was in it for him? Robert and Eleanor exchanged another one of those loaded glances. That, Robert said heavily, is the question that's haunted my mother for 3 years. And it's the question I've been investigating since she showed me this letter. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a photo. This is Malcolm Winters in 1977, around the time of your mother's letter. The photo showed a handsome man in his 30s, dark hair, confident smile, standing next to James Ashford at some corporate event. Then Robert swiped to another photo. And this is my father, James Ashford, at the same event. The same. Grace looked at both images, not understanding what she was supposed to see. Then Robert placed them side by side, zooming in on their faces. Look at the eyes, he said quietly. Look at the shape of the jaw, the way they smile. Then look at this. He pulled up a third photo. A young Bryce Ashford, maybe 16 years old. Grace's breath caught. The resemblance was unmistakable. Bryce looked like James Ashford, that much was obvious. But he also looked strikingly similar to Malcolm Winters. Same sharp jawline, same intense eyes, same confident bearing. You think... Grace couldn't finish the sentence. I think, Eleanor said, her voice shaking, that Malcolm Winters was my affair. And I think he wanted me to terminate the pregnancy because he knew the baby was his. But I miscarried before he could manipulate the situation further. And then, 6 months later, I conceived naturally with James. Or so you thought, Robert said quietly. The implication hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Eleanor had believed her children were James's biological offspring. But what if Malcolm had been more involved than anyone knew? What if the timeline wasn't as clear as she'd believed? Grace's mind reeled. Have you done DNA testing? Yes, Robert said. 6 months ago. My father, James Ashford, is definitely my biological father. The test was conclusive. But that doesn't explain why Malcolm was so desperate to ensure that earlier pregnancy didn't continue. It doesn't explain why he paid your mother $5,000 to manipulate Eleanor toward termination. Unless, Grace said slowly, the pieces clicking together, He thought the baby was his. You said Eleanor's affair was with someone James worked with. That was Malcolm, right? Eleanor nodded miserably. Yes. It was a brief thing, maybe 8 weeks. I was lonely, James was consumed with work, and Malcolm was charming and attentive. When I realized I was pregnant, I didn't even think about the timeline carefully. I just panicked. So Malcolm assumed the baby was his, Grace continued, and wanted it terminated before it could threaten his position in the company or his relationship with James. But when you miscarried naturally, and then later conceived James's child, Malcolm must have realized he'd dodged a bullet. But why stay silent all those years? Robert asked. Why not just disappear? Why continue working with my father for another 30 years? Guilt, Eleanor said softly. Or insurance. If he left suddenly after my miscarriage, it might have raised questions. Better to stay, act normal, pretend nothing ever happened. And maybe, she paused, her expression haunted, maybe he stayed to make sure I never revealed the affair, to keep me silent through proximity. Grace set down the letter, her mind spinning with implications. Her mother hadn't just helped Eleanor through a crisis. She'd been caught in the middle of a manipulation scheme, orchestrated by a man protecting his own interests. And she'd carried that guilt for 40 years, never telling anyone, using Eleanor's anonymous money to build a better life for her daughter. There's more, Robert said, and Grace's stomach dropped at his tone. 3 months ago, I started investigating Malcolm's estate. He left behind a substantial amount of money, most of it going to various charities and distant relatives. But there was one bequest that didn't make sense. $50,000 to a Sarah Patterson, to be delivered to an address in Chicago. Grace's head snapped up. Patterson? That was the name Mom used for the safety deposit box. Exactly. Malcolm knew your mother's alias. And he left her money. Maybe as payment for her silence, maybe as an apology. We don't know. But the address on the bequest was your mother's apartment. The one where I assume you still live? Grace nodded numbly. She died before the money came? The estate is still in probate. The money hasn't been distributed yet. But Grace, Robert leaned forward, his expression intense. There's a condition on the bequest. The money can only be claimed by Sarah Patterson or her direct heir, in person at the executor's office in Phoenix. And the claimant has to provide documentation proving their relationship to Sarah. Why? Grace asked. Why make it so complicated? Because, Eleanor said quietly, Malcolm wanted to ensure whoever claimed that money knew the full story. The executor has instructions to share a sealed letter with the claimant before releasing the funds. A letter that I suspect contains Malcolm's version of what happened in 1977. His explanation, maybe his confession. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. Malcolm Winters had orchestrated a scheme to manipulate Eleanor into terminating a pregnancy he believed was his. He'd paid Sarah Williams to help execute that scheme. And now, decades later, he'd left behind money and a letter that might finally explain why. I need to go to Phoenix, Grace said suddenly. I need to read that letter. We'll go with you, Robert said immediately. Whatever's in that letter, you shouldn't face it alone. And honestly, my mother and I deserve to know the truth as much as you do. Eleanor reached over and took Grace's hand again. Your mother was a good woman, Grace. Whatever choices she made, whatever money she took, she used it to give you a better life. And she protected my secret for 40 years. That's loyalty. That's love. Grace nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about her mother's quiet life, her careful secrets, the way she'd always seemed to carry a weight Grace couldn't see. She was thinking about Malcolm Winters and his manipulation, about Eleanor's affair and miscarriage, about the complex web of guilt and silence that had connected these people for decades. And she was thinking about Bryce Ashford, who'd fired her this morning over a stain, having no idea that his entire family history was built on secrets, lies, and the kindness of a black nurse who'd been paid to manipulate, but chose to care instead. When can we leave for Phoenix? Grace asked. Robert checked his phone. I can have the company jet ready by tomorrow morning. We'll go, read Malcolm's letter, claim your inheritance, and get answers. As they stood to leave, Grace turned back to Eleanor. One more question. The baby you miscarried, if it had been Malcolm's, if everything had gone the way he wanted, would you have kept it? Or would you have terminated? Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I don't know. I was so scared, so confused. Maybe I would have terminated. Maybe that's why your mother's genuine counsel, her refusal to manipulate me, mattered so much. She gave me space to make my own choice, even though she'd been paid to take that choice away. She gave you dignity, Grace said softly. The same thing Bryce tried to take from me this morning. Eleanor smiled through her tears. Yes, and now, 48 years later, we're going to honor that dignity by finding out the truth, all of it. As Grace left the office and headed toward the elevator, her phone buzzed. A text from her daughter, Zoe, who was studying pre-med at Northwestern. "Mom, you're trending. Someone posted a video of you at the hotel and now it's everywhere. Are you okay? Call me." Grace pulled up social media and froze. The video of her humiliation and Eleanor's dramatic revelation had indeed gone viral. Justice for Grace was trending. People were sharing the story, praising Eleanor, condemning Bryce, and speculating wildly about the backstory. But it was the comments that caught her attention. Thousands of people sharing their own stories of being humiliated at work, of being treated as invisible, of having their dignity stripped away by people in power. Grace's story had become a symbol of something larger. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, where she'd been fired just hours ago, Grace realized her life would never be the same. The truth about her mother, the inheritance waiting in Phoenix, the job offer, the viral video, it was all too much to process. But one thing was clear. Sarah Williams had kept secrets to protect the people she loved, and now those secrets were finally coming to light. The question was, how many more secrets remained? And what would they reveal about the people Grace thought she knew? The private jet cut through the clouds at 35,000 feet, carrying 3 people bound together by decades-old secrets. Grace pressed her forehead against the window, watching Arizona's rust-colored landscape emerge below. Somewhere down there, in a law office in Phoenix, Malcolm Winter's final confession waited. Eleanor sat across from her, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed documents. Robert worked on his laptop, fielding messages about the media firestorm back in Chicago. The video of Grace's firing had been viewed over 15 million times in 24 hours. Bryce had issued a public apology, scripted, stiff, and universally mocked online. The Ashford Grand stock had dipped 3%, but none of that seemed to matter right now. "Grace," Eleanor said, setting down her papers, "whatever we find in that letter, I want you to know something. Your mother made choices based on circumstances we can't fully understand. She lived in a different time, faced different pressures. Don't let Malcolm's words, whatever they are, diminish who Sarah was." Grace nodded, though anxiety churned in her stomach. "I keep thinking about all the times I asked her about the past and she changed the subject. All the questions she deflected. I thought she was just private. Now I realize she was protecting me from something." "Maybe," Robert said, looking up from his laptop. "Or maybe she was protecting herself. Guilt is a heavy burden to carry alone." The plane began its descent into Phoenix Sky Harbor. Within an hour, they were sitting in a conference room at Winters and Associates, the law firm handling Malcolm's estate. The executor, a severe-looking woman named Patricia Chen, placed a sealed envelope on the table in front of Grace. "Ms. Williams, before I give you this, I need to verify your identity and relationship to Sarah Patterson, also known as Sarah Williams." Patricia slid a form across the table. "Birth certificate, please." Grace provided the documentation. Patricia examined it carefully, then nodded. "Everything appears in order. The bequest of $50,000 will be transferred to your account within 5 business days. But first, per Mr. Winter's instructions, you must read this letter. In private, if you prefer." Grace looked at Eleanor and Robert. "No. Whatever it says, they should hear it too. This involves all of us." Patricia nodded and left the room. Grace's hands trembled as she broke the seal and unfolded 2 typed pages. Malcolm Winter's voice seemed to rise from the paper, speaking from beyond the grave. "To whoever claims this bequest, if you're reading this, you're Sarah Patterson's heir. My name is Malcolm Winters, and 48 years ago I did something unforgivable. I'm not writing this for redemption. I'm past that. I'm writing because secrets have a way of poisoning everything they touch, and I've watched this particular poison spread for nearly 5 decades. In 1977, I was 32 years old and working as a financial advisor for James Ashford. I was ambitious, hungry, convinced I deserved more than I had. James trusted me completely. He brought me into his home, his family, his life, and I betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. I had an affair with his wife, Eleanor. It lasted 8 weeks, a series of careful meetings, stolen moments, lies upon lies. Eleanor was lonely, vulnerable, and I exploited that. When she told me she was pregnant, I panicked. Grace paused, her eyes scanning ahead. Eleanor had gone pale. Robert's jaw was clenched. The baby could have been James's or mine. The timing was unclear, but I couldn't risk it. If Eleanor had that baby and it turned out to be mine, DNA testing might eventually reveal the truth. My career would be destroyed. My relationship with James would end. Everything I'd built would collapse. So I found Sarah Patterson, a nurse at a Southside clinic. I offered her $5,000 to guide Eleanor toward termination, to make it seem like Eleanor's choice while subtly manipulating the outcome. Sarah took the money. She was struggling financially, desperate, but she didn't do what I paid her to do. Sarah gave Eleanor genuine counsel. She presented all options fairly. She never pushed toward termination. When Eleanor miscarried naturally at 12 weeks, I was relieved but also furious. I'd paid good money for an outcome that happened on its own. I demanded the money back from Sarah. She refused and threatened to expose everything unless I left Eleanor alone. I disappeared from Eleanor's life after that, though I remained in James's business circle. And then something unexpected happened. Eleanor conceived again 6 months later. James was ecstatic. He'd been told he was likely infertile, and suddenly his wife was pregnant with what would become their son, Robert. Grace glanced at Robert, whose expression had gone carefully blank. I arranged for discreet DNA testing when Robert was born, blood samples from the hospital. It wasn't hard to obtain them with the right connections. The results were definitive. James was Robert's biological father. My affair with Eleanor had resulted in nothing but a miscarriage and years of guilt. But here's what I've never told anyone. Here's the secret that's eaten at me for decades. That miscarriage wasn't natural. Eleanor gasped. Grace's hands tightened on the paper. I couldn't risk waiting to see if Eleanor would terminate the pregnancy on her own. I couldn't trust that Sarah wouldn't eventually convince her to keep it. So I took matters into my own hands. I researched drugs that could induce miscarriage and early pregnancy. I found a medication that could be slipped into food or drink without detection. Tasteless, quick-acting, effective. And one evening, when I was invited to the Ashfords' home for dinner, I put it in Eleanor's wine. She miscarried 3 days later. James called me, devastated, asking me to help him support Eleanor through the loss. I played the concerned friend while knowing I'd caused the very tragedy he was mourning. Sarah Patterson figured it out. I don't know how. Maybe medical intuition. Maybe she'd seen similar cases. But 2 weeks after the miscarriage, she confronted me. She said she'd reviewed Eleanor's symptoms and suspected pharmaceutical intervention. She couldn't prove it, but she knew. She could have reported me, could have gone to the police, to James, to anyone. Instead, she made a deal. I would leave Eleanor alone forever. I would never contact her, never reveal the affair, never interfere in her life again, and I would wire money to a specific account every year, $5,000 annually for as long as Sarah lived. I paid. For 39 years I paid. Not out of generosity, but out of fear. Sarah held my secret, my crime, and could have destroyed me at any moment. The payments stopped when Sarah disappeared, changed her name, moved somewhere I couldn't find her. I kept looking, kept trying to fulfill our arrangement, but she'd vanished completely. When Sarah died in 2019, I found her obituary by accident. I felt relief and grief in equal measure. Relief that the one person who knew my darkest secret was gone. Grief that I'd never get to apologize for the unforgivable thing I'd done. This bequest is my final payment. $50,000. Roughly 10 years' worth of payments at the old rate. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's all I have left to give. To Sarah's heir. Your mother was the most principled person I ever met. She had every right to expose me, ruin me, destroy my career and reputation. Instead, she took my money and used it to build something good. To give you opportunities she never had. She turned blood money into a better life for her child. That's grace I never deserved. To Eleanor, if you're reading this, I'm sorry is inadequate. I violated your trust, your body, your autonomy. I caused the miscarriage that devastated you. I let you believe it was natural when it was murder. And I lived with James's friendship for 30 more years while knowing what I'd done to his wife. I don't expect forgiveness, I don't deserve peace, but the truth at least deserves to see light. Malcolm Winters. The silence in the conference room was absolute. Grace set down the letter with shaking hands. Eleanor sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. Robert had his head in his hands. He killed my baby, Eleanor whispered finally. He drugged me and killed my baby. Mom, Robert started, but Eleanor cut him off. I spent 48 years believing it was my body that failed, that something was wrong with me, that the miscarriage was punishment for the affair, for my choices, for my sins, and it was murder. It was always murder. Grace felt sick. Her mother had known, had figured it out and used that knowledge to protect Eleanor, to secure financial stability for her own child, and to ensure Malcolm could never hurt anyone again. Sarah Williams hadn't just been paid off. She'd been a guardian, a protector, using the only leverage she had. "Your mother was extraordinary," Robert said quietly, looking at Grace. "She could have gone to the police. Malcolm could have gone to prison. But she understood that exposing him would expose your mom's affair, destroy her marriage, ruin multiple lives. So she chose a different kind of justice, one that protected Eleanor while ensuring Malcolm paid in perpetuity. She made him pay for 39 years, Grace said, understanding flooding through her. $5,000 annually, that's nearly $200,000 over the years. That's how she afforded my school supplies, my college application fees, our apartment when we should have been homeless." Eleanor wiped her eyes. "And she never told you, never burdened you with the knowledge that your opportunities were funded by blood money from a man who'd committed murder. Because she transformed it," Grace said softly. "She took money earned through his guilt and used it to create something good. That's not blood money anymore. That's redemption money. That's justice." Patricia Chen knocked and entered. "Is everything all right? Should I?" "We're fine," Robert said, though his voice shook. "We just need a few minutes." After Patricia left, the three of them sat in silence, processing. Finally, Grace spoke. "What happens now? Do we report this? Malcolm's dead, but this is still a confession to murder, or at least manslaughter." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "What purpose would it serve? Malcolm's gone. James is gone. The only people left to hurt are us, and we've been hurt enough." "But justice," Grace started. "Justice," Eleanor interrupted gently, "is what your mother gave me. She ensured Malcolm paid for his crime every single year. She protected me from knowing the truth when knowing would have destroyed me. And she used his guilt to build a better world for you. That's more justice than any courtroom could provide." Robert nodded agreement. "Mom's right, this stays between us. Malcolm's confession dies in this room." Grace looked down at the letter again, at Malcolm's words about her mother's grace and principles. Sarah Williams had been offered $5,000 to manipulate someone, and had refused. She'd discovered a murder and had used that knowledge not for revenge but for protection and provision. She'd carried these secrets to her grave to protect the people she loved. "I wish I could talk to her," Grace whispered, "just once more, to tell her I understand, to tell her she was brave." Eleanor reached across the table and took Grace's hand. "She knows. Wherever she is, she knows." As they left the law office and stepped into Phoenix's dry heat, Grace felt something shift inside her. The humiliation of yesterday, the viral video, the job offer, all of it seemed smaller now against the backdrop of her mother's quiet heroism. Sarah Williams had been paid to betray but chose to protect, had discovered murder but chose mercy, had carried guilt that wasn't hers to carry so her daughter could walk through the world unburdened. And now Grace understood. Her mother's greatest gift wasn't the money or opportunities. It was the example of how to transform darkness into light, how to choose grace over vengeance, how to protect others even at cost to yourself. But as they drove back to the airport, one question nagged at Grace. If her mother had protected Eleanor's secret for 48 years, what other secrets had Sarah Williams carried? And were there more revelations still waiting to surface? The Ashford Grand's boardroom was full when Grace walked in 3 days later. She'd spent 72 hours in a whirlwind. Interviews with HR, orientation sessions, wardrobe shopping for her new position, and fielding calls from her daughter Zoe, who'd seen the viral video and couldn't believe her mother was now a hotel director. But this meeting was different. This was the executive leadership team, the department heads, the people who actually ran the hotel's operations. And sitting at the far end of the table, looking smaller than Grace had ever seen him, was Bryce Ashford. Robert stood at the head of the table. "Everyone, I'd like to introduce Grace Williams, our new Director of Staff Relations and Development. Grace comes to us with 12 years of experience in hospitality services and a deep understanding of what makes this hotel function. She'll be overseeing employee welfare, training programs, and workplace culture initiatives." Polite applause. Grace noticed some genuine smiles, particularly from longtime employees who'd witnessed her humiliation in the lobby. But she also noticed skeptical looks from newer executives who saw her promotion as nepotism or publicity damage control. "Grace will report directly to me," Robert continued, "and will have full authority to implement changes she deems necessary to improve staff morale and retention. I expect everyone's cooperation." As Grace took her seat, Bryce's eyes met hers briefly. The confidence was gone. In its place was something that looked like shame mixed with resentment. He'd been demoted to assistant manager of guest services, a position 3 levels below where he'd been, and moved to the hotel's smaller property in Milwaukee. His public humiliation had been nearly as complete as Grace's. Almost. The meeting proceeded through standard agenda items: occupancy rates, upcoming renovations, the investor situation. Grace listened carefully, taking notes, observing dynamics. She noticed how certain executives dismissed ideas from lower-level managers, how women's suggestions were often interrupted or credited to men who repeated them, how the few employees of color in the room seemed to choose their words more carefully. She saw it all now, with new eyes. The same dynamics that had kept her invisible for 12 years were still operating, just at higher levels. "One more thing," Robert said as the meeting was wrapping up. "The investment deal with Meridian Capital. After the events of last week, they've requested an additional due diligence meeting. They want to understand our company culture, our values, our commitment to employee welfare. Grace, I'd like you to lead that presentation." Grace's stomach dropped. "Sir, I've only been in this position for 3 days, which makes you perfect. You understand this hotel from the ground up. You can speak authentically about our culture because you've lived it. They want to know we're serious about change. Show them we are." After the meeting, Grace returned to her new office, a small but professional space on the executive floor with a view of the Chicago River. She was still getting used to having a door that closed, a desk that wasn't a supply cart, business cards with her name printed in raised letters. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Eleanor entered, moving slowly with her cane. "How was your first leadership meeting?" "Terrifying and enlightening in equal measure," Grace admitted. "I have to present to the investors next week and I have no idea what I'm doing." Eleanor settled into the chair across from Grace's desk. "You know exactly what you're doing. You've been observing this hotel's culture for 12 years. You've seen what works and what doesn't. Now you get to change it." Grace pulled out her notebook. "I've been making lists. Staff complaints that were ignored. Safety concerns dismissed. The way housekeeping is treated versus front desk staff. The subtle, and not so subtle, discrimination. But Eleanor, implementing real change means challenging people who've been here longer than me, who have more experience, who will resist." Eleanor finished. "Yes, change is uncomfortable, especially for people who benefit from the current system. But Grace, you have something most new executives don't have. You have a story that's been viewed by 15 million people. You have public support. Use it." Grace studied the older woman. In the days since Phoenix, Eleanor had seemed different, lighter somehow, despite the devastating revelation about Malcolm. "How are you handling everything? The letter? The truth about the miscarriage?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "I've carried guilt about that miscarriage for 48 years. Blamed myself, blamed my body, believed it was punishment for my choices. Learning it was murder, learning Malcolm drugged me, it's horrifying. But it's also liberating, it wasn't my fault. I can finally let go of that guilt." She leaned forward. "Your mother gave me that gift, Grace. By figuring out what Malcolm did, by making him pay, by protecting me from the truth until I was strong enough to handle it, she gave me peace. And now I want to give you something in return." Eleanor pulled an envelope from her purse. "This arrived this morning. It's from a law firm in Boston. Apparently your mother had a life insurance policy no one knew about. A small one, maybe $5,000. She named you as beneficiary, but the firm lost track of you after your mother died. The viral video helped them locate you." Grace opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a check and a letter from the insurance company, but there was also a smaller envelope marked, "To be given to Grace with the policy payout," in her mother's handwriting. With shaking fingers, Grace opened her mother's letter. "My darling Grace, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're finally getting answers to questions you probably didn't know you should ask. By now, you might have learned about Eleanor Ashford, about Malcolm Winters, about the choices I made 48 years ago. I need you to understand something. The money Malcolm paid me over the years, the $5,000 annually, I told you it was from different sources. Scholarships, grants, bonuses from work. I lied. It was blood money, payment for my silence about a terrible crime. But Grace, I never regretted taking it. Not once. Because every dollar went toward giving you opportunities I never had. Your school supplies, your college applications, the laptop that got you through your first year at community college before you had to drop out to help me with medical bills. I turned his guilt into your future. That's not something I'm ashamed of. It's something I'm proud of. There's one more thing you should know. One more secret I've carried, and this one is mine to tell. Grace's heart raced as she read the next paragraph. When you were 5 years old, your father left us. I told you he abandoned us, that he was a coward who couldn't handle responsibility. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Your father didn't just leave, he threatened us. He'd gotten involved with dangerous people, owed them money, and they were coming after him. He told me that if we stayed connected to him, we'd be targets too. So he left to protect us, and I let you believe he was simply a deadbeat, because it was easier than explaining that your father loved you enough to disappear. His real name wasn't Marcus Williams, it was Marcus Patterson, the same last name I used for the safety deposit box, for the anonymous accounts where Malcolm sent payments. I used your father's alias to create a separate identity, a way to keep Malcolm's money separate from our public life. Your father died 8 years ago. Lung cancer, alone in a hospital in Detroit. He never reached out because he thought keeping his distance kept you safe. Maybe he was right. Maybe he was wrong. But he loved you, Grace. I need you to know that. I've lived with so many secrets, carried so many truths that weren't mine to share. But this one, your father's love, was mine to tell. And I'm sorry I waited until death to tell it. Build something beautiful from the ashes, my darling girl. That's what we do. That's what women like us have always done. All my love, Mom Grace couldn't breathe. Her father hadn't abandoned them, he'd left to protect them. And her mother had carried that secret too, letting Grace believe an easier lie rather than the complicated truth. Grace? Eleanor's voice was gentle. What does it say? Grace handed her the letter, unable to speak. As Eleanor read, her expression softened with understanding and pain. Your mother protected everyone, Eleanor said finally. You, me, your father's memory. She carried other people's secrets and transformed them into something good. I don't know if I can do this, Grace whispered. This job, these responsibilities. My mother was extraordinary. You're her daughter, Eleanor interrupted firmly. You have her strength, her grace, her ability to transform darkness into light. And Grace, you don't have to be her. You just have to be yourself. A knock at the door interrupted them. Robert entered, his expression grim. We have a situation. Bryce didn't show up for his shift in Milwaukee. His apartment is empty. His phone goes straight to voicemail. He's gone. Grace and Eleanor exchanged glances. What do you mean, gone? I mean he's disappeared. Left a note on his apartment door that just said, I'm sorry, and vanished. His bank accounts haven't been touched. His credit card's inactive. It's like he evaporated. Eleanor's face had gone pale. Robert, find him. Whatever it takes, find your nephew. He may have made terrible choices, but he's still family. As Robert left to coordinate the search, Grace stood at her window, looking down at the hotel lobby where her life had changed forever just days ago. Her mother's letter weighed heavy in her pocket. Her new responsibilities weighed heavy on her shoulders. But she also felt something else. Purpose. Her mother had spent decades protecting people, carrying secrets, transforming pain into possibility. Now it was Grace's turn. The question was, where had Bryce gone? And why did his disappearance feel less like running away and more like running toward something? As if in answer, Grace's phone buzzed with an unknown number. The text message contained just 4 words. I know what happened. Grace stared at the text message, her blood running cold. I know what happened. 4 words that could mean anything, or everything. Her finger hovered over the reply button when another message appeared. Meet me at Millennium Park. Cloudgate. 1 hour. Come alone. Bryce. She should tell Robert. Should alert security. Should not go alone to meet a man who'd just disappeared under mysterious circumstances. But something in those words, the vulnerability, the desperation, made her grab her coat instead. 50 minutes later, Grace stood beneath Chicago's famous bean sculpture, her breath forming clouds in the December air. Tourists snapped photos around her, oblivious to the drama unfolding. She checked her watch. Any minute now. Thank you for coming. Bryce emerged from behind a group of schoolchildren. He looked terrible, unshaven, wearing the same clothes from days ago, dark circles under his eyes. The polished millionaire was gone, replaced by someone who looked broken. Your family is looking for you, Grace said carefully. They're worried. I know. Bryce shoved his hands in his pockets. I've been sitting in a motel room in Gary, Indiana for 3 days, just sitting, thinking, hating myself. Bryce, I know what happened, he interrupted. Not the stuff about Malcolm Winters and your mother. I mean, I figured that out from context, but I know what happened to me. Why I turned into the person who could fire you over a stain. Why I needed to humiliate you to feel powerful. Grace waited. Around them, the city moved on. Couples walking hand in hand. Business people rushing to meetings. Street performers entertaining crowds. Normal life while theirs had been turned upside down. My dad raised me to believe that being in Ashford meant being better than everyone else, Bryce said. That our money, our position, our family name, it all meant we were inherently superior. And I believed it. God, I believed it so completely. He looked up at the beans' warped reflection, where their images stretched and distorted. When I saw that video, me firing you, my grandmother's revelation, the way I looked standing there so smug and cruel, I didn't recognize myself. Or maybe I did, and that's what scared me. I recognized exactly who I'd become. So you ran, Grace said quietly. I ran, he confirmed, but not from you or my family. I ran from the realization that I'm 28 years old, and I've never done a single thing that mattered, never earned anything real, never built anything that wasn't handed to me. I'm an empty suit filled with my father's expectations and my own insecurities. Grace studied him. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something raw and honest. Why did you text me? Because you deserved an apology. A real one, not the script my father's PR team wrote. Because you're the only person who might understand what it's like to have your entire life redefined in a single moment. He met her eyes. That video went viral, but it didn't just destroy me. It freed me. Does that make sense? More than you know, Grace said, thinking of her mother's letter, of Malcolm's confession, of all the secrets that had shaped her life without her knowledge. Bryce pulled out his phone, showing her a screenshot. I've been reading the comments. Thousands of people sharing stories about being humiliated at work, treated as invisible, fired for stupid reasons. And you know what? Most of them aren't angry at me. They're grateful. They're saying finally someone exposed what workplaces are really like. Finally someone stood up and said, this isn't okay. You didn't stand up, Grace pointed out. Your grandmother did. I just stood there taking it. No, Bryce said firmly. You stood there maintaining your dignity while I tried to strip it away. That's not weakness, Grace. That's strength I'll never have. Grace felt something shift. She'd spent the past week processing so much. Her mother's secrets, the job promotion, the sudden visibility. But she hadn't processed this. That Bryce was also a victim of the Ashford legacy, just in a different way. Raised to believe he was superior. Never taught empathy. Never given the chance to fail and grow. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm leaving Chicago, not running, leaving. There's a friend from college who runs a construction company in Colorado. He offered me a job years ago, starting from the bottom. Manual labor, learning the trade, no special treatment. I turned him down because I thought it was beneath me. Now I realize it's exactly what I need. Your father will never agree to that. My father doesn't get a vote anymore. I'm 28. I have the trust fund my grandfather left me, separate from the family business. It's enough to live on modestly while I figure out who I am without the Ashford name defining me. He paused. Will you tell them? My dad and grandmother? Tell them I'm okay. Just finding my own path? Grace nodded. On one condition. You go see them first. Say goodbye properly. Face what you did, face who you are, and then walk away with your head up. Don't run like your apology doesn't matter. Bryce was quiet for a long moment. You're right. I owe them that much. He pulled out an envelope from his jacket. This is for you. My formal resignation from the Ashford Hotel Group and a confession of sorts. Everything I did wrong. Every decision I made out of ego rather than wisdom. Use it however you need to. With the investors, with staff, with anyone who questions your position. Grace took the envelope. Bryce, I don't want to destroy you. You're not destroying me. You're witnessing my reconstruction. He smiled, and for the first time, it looked genuine. Funny how getting everything you thought you wanted can show you that you wanted the wrong things all along. They stood in silence, two people whose lives had collided violently and would now diverge completely. Finally, Bryce extended his hand. Thank you, Grace, for being exactly who you are, for showing me what dignity actually looks like. She shook his hand. Good luck in Colorado. I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope you build something amazing, he replied. My grandmother chose right. This hotel needs someone who understands what it's like to be invisible. Someone who'll make sure no one else gets treated the way I treated you. As Bryce walked away, disappearing into the Chicago crowds, Grace felt an unexpected emotion. Hope. Not for herself, though she had that too, but for him. For the possibility that people could change. could recognize their mistakes and choose differently. She pulled out her phone and called Robert. I found him. He's coming to say goodbye. 1 week later, the conference room on the 23rd floor was packed. The Meridian Capital investment team sat on one side of the table, 6 executives who controlled hundreds of millions in funding. On the other side sat the Ashford leadership, with Grace at the center. Ms. Williams, the lead investor said, we've reviewed the financial documents, the operational reports, the market analysis. Everything looks solid on paper, but what happened in your lobby last week raised serious questions about company culture. We need to understand whether that incident was an aberration or a symptom of deeper problems. Grace stood, her presentation clicker in hand. Her new suit fit perfectly. Eleanor had insisted on taking her shopping at Nordstrom, but it was her mother's letter folded in her pocket that gave her real confidence. I'm going to tell you a story, Grace began. 48 years ago, a wealthy white woman had an affair and got pregnant. She was terrified. Her marriage would end, her reputation would be destroyed, and her family's business empire would collapse from scandal. She needed help. The investors leaned forward, intrigued despite themselves. A young black nurse took that woman's crisis and turned it into care. She didn't judge, she didn't exploit. She provided genuine counsel and friendship when everyone else saw only scandal. That nurse was my mother. That wealthy woman was Eleanor Ashford. Grace clicked to the next slide, a photo of the Ashford Grand's housekeeping staff. For 12 years, I worked as a housekeeper in this hotel. I was invisible. Guests walked past me without seeing me. Executives made decisions about staffing and wages without considering how those decisions affected real people, with real families. And last week I was fired publicly, humiliated deliberately, by a man who saw me as disposable. She paused, letting that sink in. The video of my firing has been viewed over 20 million times now. People are calling it justice. They're celebrating that the Ashford family stood up for me. But here's what they don't see. I was invisible long before I was fired. And there are thousands of employees across the hospitality industry who are still invisible right now. Click. Next slide. This is what you're really investing in. Not just a hotel chain, but a culture, a system, a set of values that determine whether employees are assets or obstacles. And I can tell you from experience, the culture here was broken. It valued appearance over substance, profit over people, hierarchy over humanity. One investor raised her hand. Was broken? Are you saying it's changed? It's changing, Grace corrected. In the past week, we've implemented new policies. Every employee, from housekeeping to management, now has access to anonymous feedback channels. We've created a pathway program where entry-level staff can earn certifications and advance to leadership positions. We've adjusted wages across departments to ensure equal pay for equal value, not equal prestige. Click. A chart showing employee satisfaction scores. These are preliminary results from our first week. Employee confidence in leadership is up 17%. Reported workplace conflicts are down 23%. And, she smiled, we've had 12 internal applications for positions that previously only recruited externally. That's 1 week of data, an investor pointed out. Hardly conclusive. You're right, Grace agreed. Real culture change takes years, not days. But I can promise you this. The Ashford Hotel Group is committed to that change. Not because it's good PR, though it is. Not because it prevents lawsuits, though it will. But because it's right. And because the woman who helped build this company believes that how we treat the most vulnerable among us defines who we really are. She clicked to the final slide, a quote from her mother's letter. Build something beautiful from the ashes. That's what we do. That's what women like us have always done. My mother spent her life turning other people's darkness into light, Grace said. She took blood money and used it to give me opportunities. She took secrets that could have destroyed people and used them to protect and provide. She saw the worst in human behavior and responded with the best of her own character. Grace looked around the room, meeting each investor's eyes. That's the culture we're building here, not perfection, we'll make mistakes. Not charity, we expect excellence from every employee. But dignity, opportunity. The understanding that every person who walks through our doors, whether as a guest or as staff, deserves to be seen, heard, and valued. The room was silent. Then the lead investor spoke. Ms. Williams, you've been in your position for exactly 8 days. Why should we believe you can deliver on these promises? Because I've spent 12 years watching what doesn't work, Grace replied. I've seen how good people get ground down by systems that don't value them. I've seen how arrogance and entitlement poison organizations from the top down. And I've seen how one moment of dignity, like Eleanor Ashford taking my hand in that lobby, can change everything. She closed her portfolio. You're not investing in promises. You're investing in lessons learned the hard way, in leadership that understands the cost of failure because we've paid it personally. In a company that's choosing to transform publicly rather than hide privately, that's worth $50 million of your capital. Or it's not. But either way, this is who we are now. The presentation ended. The investors huddled, conferring in whispers. Grace returned to her seat, her heart pounding. Robert leaned over. That was either brilliant or career suicide. Possibly both. 5 minutes later, the lead investor stood. We have a decision. The Meridian Capital Group will move forward with the investment. But we have one condition. Grace Williams must be promoted to VP of Human Capital and Culture, with a seat on the executive board. If she's steering this ship's culture transformation, we want her voice at the decision-making table. Grace's jaw dropped. Robert grinned. Eleanor, watching via video conference from home, was openly crying. Do you accept? The investor asked. Grace thought of her mother, carrying secrets for 48 years to protect the people she loved. Thought of Malcolm Winter's guilt money transformed into opportunity. Thought of Bryce starting over in Colorado, building something real with his own hands. Thought of all the housekeepers, cooks, maintenance workers, and front desk staff who deserve to be seen. I accept, she said. 3 months later, Grace stood in the Ashford Grand's lobby, the same spot where she'd been fired, humiliated, and ultimately transformed. But today was different. Today, the lobby was filled with employees from all departments, gathered for the launch of the Sarah Williams Fellowship Program. My mother never got to finish her nursing degree, Grace told the assembled crowd. Financial pressure, family obligations, and life's complications got in the way. But she never stopped learning, never stopped growing, never stopped believing that education could transform lives. She gestured to the banner behind her. Sarah Williams Fellowship Program, investing in our people's potential. This program will provide full tuition coverage for any Ashford Hotel Group employee pursuing higher education or professional certification. No minimum tenure required, no strings attached. Just the belief that our people's growth is our company's growth. The room erupted in applause. Grace saw tears on faces. Housekeepers who'd dreamed of college, front desk staff who'd wanted nursing degrees, maintenance workers who'd wished for engineering certifications. Eleanor sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Robert stood beside the banner, already fielding questions from trade publications about the program. And on the video screen, participating remotely from Colorado, Bryce Ashford watched with a small smile. After the ceremony, Grace returned to her office. No longer small, now a corner suite on the executive floor. Her assistant knocked. Ms. Williams, you have a visitor. She says she's your daughter? Zoe burst into the office, her Northwestern hoodie and backpack marking her as perpetually student. Mom, I just saw the fellowship announcement. Do you realize what you've done? This is going to change thousands of lives. Grace pulled her daughter into a hug. That's the idea. And did you see? Zoe pulled out her phone, showing a social media post. People are calling you the housekeeper CEO. It's trending again. Grace laughed. I'm a VP, not a CEO. Give it time, Zoe said with a grin. Then her expression softened. I wish Grandma could see this. She'd be so proud. She sees it, Grace said quietly, touching the spot above her heart where her birthmark resided. Her mother's lucky star. I believe that. As evening fell over Chicago, Grace stood at her window, watching the city lights reflect off Lake Michigan. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Dinner this weekend? I want to hear about the new initiatives, and maybe share some stories about your mother you haven't heard yet. Grace smiled, typing back, I'd love that. She thought about the journey from invisibility to influence, from powerlessness to purpose. Thought about her mother's secrets and sacrifices, about Malcolm Winter's guilt and Eleanor's grace, about Bryce's arrogance and eventual humility. Most of all, she thought about the moment in the lobby when Eleanor had taken her hand, a gesture that said, I see you, when Grace had felt most invisible. That's what she wanted to build. A culture where everyone was seen, where dignity wasn't a privilege but a right, where the accidents of birth or circumstance didn't determine your value. Her mother had spent a lifetime carrying other people's secrets and transforming darkness into light. Now Grace was carrying forward that legacy, not through silence and sacrifice, but through visibility and voice. Build something beautiful from the ashes. Her mother had written, and Grace would continue to. The housekeeper who became invisible had become the voice for everyone who'd ever been overlooked. The woman fired over a stain had transformed an industry's stains into opportunities for change. And somewhere, in memory, in legacy, in the Sarah Williams Fellowship program that would touch thousands of lives, a nurse who'd once protected a desperate woman's secret was finally getting the recognition she'd always deserved. Not for her silence, but for what she'd built from it. Not for disappearing, but for ensuring her daughter would always be seen. Grace Williams smiled, turned back to her desk and got to work. There were policies to write, programs to launch, people to lift up. Her mother's work was never done. Now it was hers to continue, and she was just getting started.